constructive assessment of Atiku Abubakar's presidential ambitions, opportunities, concerns, and national implications. My fellow Nigerians, in every democracy, no political leader, party, or presidential candidate should be above scrutiny. The purpose of democratic discourse is not to demonize individuals, but to critically examine ideas, records, leadership, capacity, and the implications of political choices for the future of the nation. As discussions continue about the possibility of former Vice President Atiku Abubakar emerging as a presidential candidate under the ADC platform or any broader opposition coalition, Nigerians must objectively assess both the strengths and concerns associated with such a candidacy. The question is not whether Atiku Abubakar is experienced. The question is whether his candidacy represents the future Nigeria needs at this critical stage of its development. The strengths of the candidacy. A fair assessment must begin by acknowledging Atiku Abubakar's strengths. He is one of the most experienced politicians in Nigeria's democratic history. His years in public service, private enterprise, and national politics have given him extensive knowledge of governance, public administration, and economic policy. Supporters often point to his experience as vice president, his understanding of economic and private sector issues, his national political network, his long-standing advocacy for certain forms of restructuring and economic liberalization, his ability to build political coalitions across regions. These qualities make him a significant figure in Nigerian politics and explain why he continues to command support across parts of the country. The question of political renewal. However, one of the most important questions facing Nigeria today is whether the country requires continuity of its traditional political class or a new generation of leadership and ideas. For more than 2 decades, many of Nigeria's most prominent political actors have remained at the center of national politics, while many of the country's challenges have persisted or worsened. Critics argue that Nigeria's problems are not merely failures of policy, but failures of political culture. They contend that recycling the same political elite, regardless of party affiliation, risks preserving the same structures that have contributed to underdevelopment, weak institutions, and public distrust. The concern is not personal. It is generational and institutional. Many Nigerians are increasingly asking whether the future can be built by leaders who have already had significant opportunities to shape the nation's past and present. The burden of public perception. In politics, perception matters almost as much as policy. One challenge facing Atiku Abubakar is that many citizens associate him with Nigeria's established political order. Whether fair or not, a significant segment of the electorate views the country's political elite as beneficiaries of a system that has often failed ordinary Nigerians. This perception creates a political hurdle because many citizens are demanding not simply a change of government, but a transformation of governance itself. For such voters, the issue is not whether a candidate is competent. It is whether the candidate represents genuine change. Economic questions. Atiku Abubakar has historically promoted market-oriented economic reforms and greater private sector participation in the economy. Supporters argue that these policies could attract investment, improve efficiency, and accelerate growth. However, critics raise several concerns. How would economic reforms be implemented without increasing hardship for vulnerable citizens? How would corruption and regulatory capture be prevented during privatization efforts? How would economic growth translate into broad-based prosperity, rather than concentrating wealth among a small elite? How would industrialization, manufacturing, and job creation be prioritized? These questions require clear and credible answers because economic policy affects the lives of millions. Governance and institutional reform. Nigeria's greatest challenge may not be the identity of its leaders, but the strength of its institutions. Any presidential candidate seeking national support must present a detailed plan for judicial reform, electoral reform, anti-corruption enforcement, public sector efficiency, constitutional reform, security modernization. Citizens increasingly expect more than campaign promises. They expect measurable implementation plans and accountability mechanisms. The focus should therefore be less on personalities and more on institutional transformation. Potential consequences of an Atiku presidency. If an Atiku administration were successful, Potential benefits could include increased investor confidence, greater engagement with the private sector, improved regional and international economic partnerships, broader political coalition, renewed discussions around restructuring and federalism. However, if the administration failed to break from traditional political practices, the consequences could include continued public distrust in government, reinforcement of elite-dominated politics, slower institutional reform, growing frustration among younger voters seeking political renewal, missed opportunities for transformational change. The ultimate outcome would depend not on campaign rhetoric, but on governance, implementation, and accountability. What Nigerians should demand, rather than supporting or opposing any candidate based solely on party, region, religion, or personality, Nigerians should demand clear answers to critical questions. How will poverty be reduced? How will jobs be created? How will insecurity be addressed? How will corruption be punished? How will institutions be strengthened? How will constitutional reform be achieved? How will government become more accountable? These questions matter more than political slogans. Conclusion. The future of Nigeria should never depend on one individual, one party, or one political movement. The nation's progress depends on strong institutions, accountable leadership, sound policies, and active citizen participation. Atiku Abubakar's candidacy, like that of any presidential contender, should be judged on its vision, credibility, implementation capacity, and commitment to national transformation. The real debate should not be whether a particular politician deserves power. The real debate should be whether Nigeria can finally build a system where leadership is measured by results, institutions are stronger than individuals, and governance serves the interests of the people rather than the ambitions of the political class. That is the standard every candidate must meet. That is the standard Nigeria deserves.